Hello and welcome to Hot Pursuit, part of the Ahval podcast and video series. Today, we are going to talk about the rising tension in the Eastern Mediterranean and put most of the things in Greek-Turkish context because the tensions are rising day by day and there is growing harsh rhetoric, but also some sort of concrete moves on the both sides, and also there is other perspectives like a recent visit by Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis to Israel, and also Italian perspective. Maybe today, these days, most important of all, the NATO and European Union context. We'll try to talk about these issues and put them everything in a picture so we can understand what really is going on. My guests are from Greece, basically. Pavlos Tsimas, journalist with Sky TV and Sky Radio. Welcome, Pavlos.
Well, hi, good morning.
Yannis Koutsomitis, the editor-in-chief of Kappa News, based in Athens. Yannis, good morning.
Günaydın.
And Cengiz Aktar, columnist with Ahval. Cengiz, good morning.
Good morning.
So let's begin with Pavlos. The context is clear, and the situation is observed from outside by growing concern, and there is now all the symptoms of multipolarity and also action that challenges the international law from various angles. What is the mood in Athens, and how does the decision makers in Athens see the situation?
I think Athens is in a mood of high anxiety. We have to go back end of last year, November, December, when the agreement between Turkey and the Libyan government about maritime zones surfaced. That was the start of a new era, I think, in Greek-Turkish relations. Then we had the incidents in the border in Evros, in the Greek-Turkish border, who brought Greek-Turkish relations, I think, in its worst moment from 1996 onwards. During the quarantine, there was a pause, and just as the quarantine was lifted, Athens is trying to catch up. We had three important moves. A, the agreement between Greece and Italy regarding maritime zones. B, the visit of Kyriakos Mitsotakis in Israel and his talks with Netanyahu. There seems to be a defense agreement going on, and there has been a very strong declaration about maritime zones. Third movement is the visit of Greek Foreign Minister Yannis in Egypt, in Cairo. I think what Athens is trying to do is to prepare for what they expect to be inevitable, some sort of tension in the coming September, October, when Turkey is expected to do a move, send a ship, do research in the waters south of the island of Crete, waters that Greece consider part of its own maritime zone, and the Turkish-Libyan agreement considers as free for Turkey. So I think this is a general framework.
You said some inevitable, preparing for inevitable. What is the inevitable from Athens' perspective?
What is expected and is considered as almost certain to happen is that at some point, late September, early October, Turkey will send a research ship trying to do tests in the waters south of Crete. And depending on where this will happen and how this will unfold, Greece is prepared to react, and the reaction is going to be strong.
The visit to Jerusalem by Mitsotakis and also Dendias talking to Greek counterparts, and also France in the same picture in many ways.
Yeah.
Do we see any patterns now taking shape in terms of restructuring the alliance pictures, etc., from Greek perspective?
Uh, Greece is feeling, I mean, Athens is feeling, the Greek government is feeling that the move by Turkey, the Turkish-Libyan agreement on maritime zone was a move in this chess plate that changed everything. And they are trying to figure out moves as a reaction to that. I think Tel Aviv, Italy, France, Egypt are parts of this effort of Athens to react to the Turkish move that is changing the whole framework in East Mediterranean.
On the chessboard of Greece, where is Russia?
Relations between Greece and Russia were at its worst. You remember that during the government, the Syriza government, and when Nikos Koutsomitis was foreign minister, there was a clash with Russia over the Prespa agreement, over the agreement between Greece and North Macedonia. At this point, Greece, in my view, reacted in a way that was counterproductive, and I think from that moment on, Greek-Russian relations are in its worst. And it was considered that Russia was lost for Greece, that the relations between Putin and Erdoğan personally kept Greece out of the picture. I think now we are in an effort to in a way, mend the trauma and bring back Russia in the Greek perspective.
Yannis Koutsomitis, I think the most actual element now, what we are discussing, is many critics see of Erdoğan and his government see as arms wrestling, maximalism vis-a-vis NATO, and also tense relations with the EU, which seems split mainly these days regarding East Med between Paris and Berlin, and which have different and almost opposing views, perhaps. Please give us the perspective of what's been happening in that context, because NATO seems in confusion, and also given the situation in the US, and Trump at one side and the American traditional institutions at the other side, and also we have Russia as the main player again somewhere, as I asked Pavlos. What's happening in NATO and EU about this issue?
Well, it's basically a great confusion because there are conflicting interests and conflicting positions between the Western allies regarding Turkey and how to deal with Erdogan. Let's start with Germany, for instance. Mrs. Merkel has always been more accommodative to Mr. Erdogan for two main reasons. One is the migration issue, which Turkey is playing a major part, and the other one is the Turkish, let's say, citizens or Turkish origin citizens in Germany, who are a big part of the German population and always play a crucial political part in the equation in Berlin. On the other hand, we have Paris and France, that we see now that Macron has lost his patience with Erdogan's maneuvers, and Macron is trying to contain the Turkish, let's say, coercion in Eastern Mediterranean through various channels, not only NATO, which we saw a couple of days ago, a move by French diplomacy in NATO to contain the movements of Turkish ships in the offshore of Libya, but also in forging talks with the Arab allies for instance, the United Arab Emirates and Egypt as well. And as you very rightly said, the US are split in two. The State Department diplomacy is trying to contain the situation, is speaking with all parties, but has also been very clear in condemning the Turkish moves and the Turkish memorandum with Libya. And lately, we had even a statement by the American ambassador in Athens saying that the United States will stand by Greece if it will be attacked or aggressed by Turkey. So we have a very mixed picture right now, and my sense is that the Greek government understands that there is no solid foundation for a resistance against Erdogan's policies in the Mediterranean, and they are very careful right now, and they keep they keep very low expectations on what kind of support Athens can get from its Western allies in this situation.
But the dynamics is set in motion now, Yannis. As it seems, Erdogan, his government is fully aware of this mixed, confused picture. Also, in addition with the wave of Corona, which sort of paralyzed many regimes, many governments in the West, and you mentioned the cautious policies of Athens, but in a way, it is inevitably going to be interpreted or continue to be interpreted by Ankara as further carte blanche for advancement, and Turkish advances are continuing because, as I said, dynamics is set in motion. So what you are saying, basically, am I understanding it right, that it seems to be a point of no return? There's some sort of, as Pavlos mentioned, inevitability in this picture.
Yes, but we need to see how the steps and how the moves of Mr. Erdogan will develop, because it will be a big difference if Turkish drilling ship will come closer to 12 nautical miles of Greek shores, or if we will just go and try and make some tests offshore of Libya, let's say 100 miles north of the Libyan coast, which is totally different equation. So my guess is Athens doesn't really know right now to which extent Erdogan is willing to raise the stakes. There is absolutely no question of if Turkish ship goes beyond 12 miles, despite Greece not declaring 12 miles its territorial waters, they would consider it an act of aggression, and they will react very fiercely. But there is a question mark on what will happen if the drilling ship, Yavuz or another one, goes and makes tests far from a Greek island, which will be like 50 nautical miles south of Crete. My understanding is that we won't see a full-scale conflict if that happens. There will be some kind of mediation from international actors to try to contain the situation. But there is a sense in Athens that 1 day or 2 days after that, there will be some kind of international mediation or international negotiation to bring Athens and Ankara on a table for some kind of negotiations for Eastern Mediterranean, because this situation cannot go on inevitably for much longer period. It will come to a head either, as Pavlos said, in 3 or 4 months or some months later. But it will definitely come to a point when all parties will sit down and discuss how this will be handled. The question mark is what the terms of this discussion will be and who will
I
be
think
in
we
advantage.
Okay. Cengiz Aktar, what is the let's look at the Turkish perspective. What is the end game of the Erdoğan government? There are different views, such as the one today at Independent, saying that Erdoğan wants to keep, by action into Iraq, Syria, Libya, etc., Turkish army, top echelons of Turkish army busy in order to avoid any sort of coup plotting against him or his government again. This is one view, of course, but there are many other views. But mainly, let's take from what Pavlos and Yannis said and see what is the end game, what and how successful has it been so far from the Turkish perspective.
Frankly, I'm not sure whether Ankara realizes all this, whether they are fully in the picture. I mean, this is a kind of crazy engine which is undergoing now. I mean, look at the theater of operations, if I may call it like this. I mean, there is a full-fledged engagement in Libya and Syria. There is a new operation that just started in Iraq, in northern Iraq. There is an ongoing, military presence, both in Cyprus, for sure, with 40,000 troops, and the new naval base, which is under construction in the northern part of the island, and the continuous, overflowing of Greek islands almost every day. They resumed again yesterday. And now the third within NATO, not to mention bilateral, disagreements with many former, allies and strategic partners. I think the regime has entered a sort of, maelstrom that it's not controlling anymore. I mean, and in that sense, I agree with both Yannis and Pavlo. And then, it's dangerous and it's very annoying actually. And because I'm not sure whether they are controlling what they are doing or they are understanding really what they are doing. It's a kind of machine folle, as we say in French. It just runs. So, but at the end of the day, if there is, a milligram of sense in front of all this nonsense, at least as far as Greece is concerned, I think what is making the regime hold for the time being is most probably a very strong embargo, both from US and the EU, exactly like for Crimea, which may happen and which will be, a final blow to the already, collapsing Turkish economy.
Well, as soon as you start talking about embargo and harsher measures, sanctions, targeted sanctions, whatnot, a counter argument comes into place. There is so much at stake, especially from German perspective. Refugee inflow, this is the main fear, and also there is a split picture within NATO, and also you have a very, very cornered Trump in White House, and decision-making process in Washington D.C. is in shambles. So this kind of, I think this is the idea, but I think this is maybe debatable. Maybe
I don't think
Pavlos
so.
has something to say about that, because
I
as
would
dangerous
like to
as the
react
situation
to this.
is, we have a big question mark.
I would like to briefly react before Pavlo. No, I think, this is casus belli. I mean, it has none, I mean, the refugees or migrants and the economic interests, vested interest of this, that, etc., that doesn't count there. I mean, this is casus belli, and it is an, open, aggression against an EU member state or, part of the United States for the matter, Greece. It's totally different. I mean, these kind of arguments cannot count when a military aggression happens. Bit like with Cyprus, although at the time neither nor Greece were part of the EU.
Well, Pavlos, Yannis, I think the main question that rises from what Cengiz has said, whether or not, and he's already said that Mitsotakis or Cyprus government can trust fully the EU and even NATO in this context, because Mitsotakis was in complaining mood the other day, saying that we need deeds also, not only words but deeds, because this is high time for deeds. So. I mean, what do you have anything to add or comment on what Cengiz has said?
Yes. If I may, yes,
Yeah,
if I may start, I think the chances of a comprehensive EU response to Turkish aggression are low, in my estimate, because there are some countries within the EU that would block any conflict with Turkey under any circumstances.
Such as Hungary, for example.
Hungary, yes. Hungary is obvious. But I think there could be a coalition of the willing in the Mediterranean that could enforce some counteraction against Turkey. And that coalition of the willing could include France, Israel, and other forces as well. But I need to point the attention of us, of our audience and yourselves, to the time element, because as you very well said, there is a very vague situation right now in Washington. And for the next upcoming months, there will be a pre-election time. We've seen in Greek history, like 1974, that I was saying that time is very critical because of the potential change in the American administration in Washington in November and eventually in January when
Pavlos, when Yannis
wants to make a brazen, if Erdogan wants to make a brazen move, he will have to do it before the US elections.
Which means September, October. Pavlos, you seem to agree, and also when Yannis said the 1974 comparisons with that period, etc.
Oh yeah, that.
But mind you, that 1974 was a incident in Cold War period. But today it's a much more complex picture.
Yes, but you see, summer 1974, a weak president, a broken decision-making process in Washington, and we know what happened. So many people are frightened by the comparison. Anyway, I agree that there is a time issue here. Erdogan has to do what he has to do between September and November, before the coming American elections, because he cannot, if he wants to do something, he has to do it before there is a regime change in Washington, because American elections might lead to a change of guard in the White House. The rational thing to expect is what Yannis said. The escalation of tension in East Mediterranean leads to some sort of an incident in late September, early October. International mediation, Turkey and Greece sit down at the table and try to find an agreement. That would be the rational thing to expect. But I'm not sure we're in a rational environment. I'm not sure Ankara's policies are guided by a rational plan. And I'm not sure that international reactions would be rational, given the fear of Germany, of the refugee factor, and B, the fact that US is not there, and US policy cannot be in any way understood. It's hard for me to understand what is American policy in Libya. It's hard for me to understand what is the American policy towards Turkey. And it's hard for me to understand what is Turkish policy. I understood in the beginning there was this theory, zero problems with neighbors. and a strong European drive in the Turkish policy in the first years of Erdoğan. Then, after the Arab Spring, there was a new perspective, understandable, that Turkey might become the leader of a new era in the Muslim world, Muslim reformation, etc., etc. What is the plan now? It's very hard for me to understand. What is the plan for? As you ask, what is the end game for Erdoğan? At this point, it's hard for me to understand.
Perhaps time is running out. We should conclude by giving the word to Cengiz to respond to these questions, perhaps.
Well, I mean, this is exactly what I said. I mean, it's a machine fault. It's a crazy engine which is running the regime both externally and internally, and they are not in control of it anymore. And this is very dangerous. And frankly, there is no more Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Ankara. The foreign decisions are taken by a very small group sitting in the presidential palace. And we understand, for instance, that the ambassador in Athens is hardly aware of what is going on, when it comes to bilateral relations between the two countries. I mean, there are some mavericks. It's bit the Dr. Folamour, the Dr. Strangelove, if you like. This is where we are, and this is very dangerous, mind you.
Well, also, the Professor Hamit Bozaslan, a Kurdish historian with the Sciences Politiques High School in Paris, compared the current restructuring of power picture in Ankara as cartel. Because it's different groups with convergent interests. Would that fit into the picture that you're painting, Cengiz? That the power structuring cartelized, like cartels?
Yes, but I mean, what are the futures of this group? I mean, they are nationalist and they are bellicose, and they are wherever they come from. I mean, they can be from the classical left to classical right. They are both, I repeat, nationalist and bellicose. From the Turkish left to today, the so-called left, be it social democrats or more than the social democrats, we haven't heard any serious, critic of the Turkish foreign policy regarding all these theater of operations that I mentioned. The only political party which raised the issue time to time is the Kurdish party, the HDP, full stop. And we know how how difficult their life is nowadays. Otherwise, the majority of the Turkish political elite, but also, I'm afraid, the majority of the Turkish population agrees with the government external adventures.
Anything to add before I conclude, gentlemen?
Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Thank you very much,
cross our fingers.
Pavlos Tsimas, Yannis Koutsomitis, and Cengiz Aktar, all joining me in Hot Pursuit of Ahval series from Greece, talking about East Med conflict and rising tensions. Thank you, and talk to you again.